Welcome to Space World. Let's go.
Hello, it's me, Hyperness. This video is part of the Maraython, where Rayman fans all over the world gets to do their own review or retrospective to show off their love for the series. And with Rayman's 30th anniversary coming up, I thought it would make sense to do the game that started it all, Rayman 1. And I've decided I want to do the Sega Saturn version of the game. Okay, hold up, I just remembered something. You gotta present yourself. God, I'm terrible at these. Okay. Hello, my name is Sammy. I'm 28 and I live in the USA. I love retro games and I like making videos about Rayman. Whether it's mainline games or lesser known spin-offs that you don't see a lot of people bring up. I would like to make videos on other games, but otherwise my channel mostly focuses on Rayman. Okay, I hope that was good enough. My history with Rayman 1 is kind of funny. I grew up with Nintendo consoles, so I used to know this game as Rayman Advance. It was one of the few games I had for the Game Boy Advance, so this would end up being my second Rayman game. My first Rayman game being Rayman Arena. And I do remember playing it a lot, but I could never find all the cages. And at the time, I just didn't care enough to do it. And I wouldn't find out that Rayman Advance is a port of the original Rayman until years later. And when I finally decided to play the console version of Rayman, my first impression was, well, no wonder I couldn't find all the cages. You can't see anything on this tiny screen. Right at the beginning of the game, the magician will tell you the story of Rayman! In Rayman's world, nature and people live together at peace. The Great Platoon provides and maintains the harmony and balance in the world. Of course, this didn't last long as the evil Mr. Dark steals the Great Platoon and the Electoons, and also defeat Batilla the Fairy as she tries to protect it. With the world unbalanced, the Electoons needs a hero, so it's up for Rayman to save the day. At the start of the game, you can't really do much. You can only walk, jump, and crawl, and do this little silly face. After your walk in the forest, you'll meet up with Batilla, and she's gonna grant you new powers throughout your journey. The first power she gives you is punching. You can charge your fist for extra range, and do extra damage. I prefer the punch in the air, because you still get a decent amount of range, and it does enough damage to beat off enemies. Other powers that she'll give you throughout your journey is hanging on ledges, and the ability to grab and swing on rings, and this is also used to grab lives, helicopter, and running. Rayman 1 has 6 worlds you'll have to go through. You have Dream Forest, Bandland, Blue Mountains, Picture City, Cave of Scops, and Candy Chateau, which is unlocked when you have all the Electoons freed. And they all have lovely backgrounds, and it feels like I'm walking around in a painting. And each of these worlds have their own unique mechanics. Like for Dream Forest, it has plums that acts like a basketball, and you can use it to get up areas you couldn't reach to, and it can be used to traverse water, and you can also throw it at the living stones, so it can be safe to land on their heads. Heck, there's even one level where you ride a plum down a hill, going at high speed. I love stuff like this. And for Bandland, it introduces ice physics that can be used for high-speed platforming, but it's often used to make the game more challenging. And the other worlds make use of the ice physics too. One thing I do like about this game is a large variety of enemies, and some of them are exclusive for each world, with the exception of the Hunter and the Anti-Toons. So enemies like the Living Stones stay in Dream Forest, and the Stone Man only stay in Blue Mountains. There's also different types of the same enemies that have different behaviors. Like Bandland has crickets that just walks around, but then you also have ones that are aggressive. If you know how to take them out, then they're pretty easy to handle. If not, then you'll totally get your butt kicked. Now, they don't spawn these guys very often, so they don't really overstay their welcome. In fact, there's some enemies that only appears in one level, and are not seen again anywhere else. And it feels like every level always offers something new, and it hardly feels like one level is too similar to another. Speaking of enemies, let's check out those bosses. We have Visit as your first boss, and he is very easy, and when you beat him up, he'll start crying, but Rayman gives him a pat on the back, so it's okay. That's totally how friendship worked back in my youth. And in the next stage, you get to ride him. And then you have the next boss, which is Mosquito. That's pretty much just a harder version of Visit, only he throws out different sizes of spike fruits, and has a bit of extra health. One of the things I really like about the bosses in this game is how you're introduced to them pretty early for each world. So in the second level of Bandland, you have Mr. Sax, and he'll shoot out a little note, and you'll have to punch it back at him so he can get out of the way. And the next time you meet him, you'll have to use those notes to damage him. And when you beat these bosses, the area the bosses would normally appear at will no longer be accessible. So when you replay the levels where the boss would normally be at, you'll skip that area completely. It's a neat touch, and it feels like you're really making progression throughout your journey. Mr. Stones is my favorite boss. The first time you meet him, he'll try to chase you down until you reach under this spot, then you just wait for him to leave. Then the next time you meet him, you'll fight him for real. And to beat him, you have to punch this smiling rock to knock him out. And when he's beaten, the smiling rock will take his body, and he'll do a little dance. I like this guy. And then you have Space Mama, who is the hardest boss in the Rayman series. The first thing she does when you fight her is she tries to step closer to you, and she gives you like barely any room. She's actually supposed to take knockback when you hit her, but sometimes it doesn't work. Then the next stage, she spawns a lot of crockpots you have to dodge, and in the next phase, she goes behind the washing machine, and you have to punch the washing machine to get rid of it. Like, they went all out with this boss. Now, despite how difficult she is, it is possible to beat her without taking damage, but considering that she doesn't get knocked back sometimes, it feels like you gotta be lucky. Then you have Mr. Scops, who's also pretty hard to beat at first. Like, when he brings down all the platforms, he gets too close to you and you have to hang onto this ledge. Then he steps back and do the same thing 3 times. There is actually an easier method to do this. You can punch him away from a ledge, and I think doing that is much easier compared to just hanging on the ledge and wait for him. And once you do fight him, he shoots little beams at you, and you have to use your fist to throw it back at him. And just like that, he becomes the easiest boss. After beating Mr. Scops, you can't enter the final world yet, unless you have break in every single cage. Now, some of these aren't terribly hard to find, but there are a few of them where you may need to use a walkthrough, and I wouldn't blame you for doing it. Actually, if you know where most of them are at, you can get them in one go, and there's actually a few levels where the powers are acquired, mostly for Dream Forest, but otherwise, I would recommend looking up the maps online. That way you don't have to sit through a walkthrough. Well, once you have all the Electoons free, let's see how the game ends. So once you enter Candy Chateau, you instantly start surfing on a frying pan, going at high speed. And you don't want to gain too much speed around the end because there's puddles you have to jump over, and sometimes it can be pretty easy to miss these jumps. After this, Mr. Dark shows up, and he spawns Bad Rayman, and he does everything that you do, and if he touches you, you die. But as long as you keep your distance from him, you should be fine. After this, Mr. Dark puts a curse on you, where your controls are reversed, but only for half the level. After this, Mr. Dark puts another curse on you, where you run automatically and all you can do is jump. Well, that's, interesting. Oh yeah, Mr. Dark also stole your fist power. Alright, we're at Mr. Dark's lair, and he has our fist tied to a rope. How dare you tease me like this? So all you can do at this point is dodge his fire attacks. And then eventually he'll say to you, "You're doomed, Rayman," and he'll close the fire on you. And just when it seems like all hope is lost, the Electoons grab the fist power and gives it back to Rayman. So now the real fight really begins. Oh wait, he just left. Well, I was told in the wiki that he transformed into those bosses, but it did kind of look like he just left the room, like he didn't think his plan would get this far. So you only have to fight 3 bosses. One is Mr. Stones with Mr. Scop's head, the next one is Space Mama with Bizit's body, and the last boss is Bizit with Space Mama's body and Mr. Sax's shoes. And after that, well, that's it. You beat the game. Everyone is celebrating your victory, and the credits roll. I really like Rayman 1. It's one of the few games I go back to fairly often. Like, I pretty much never get tired of replaying it. Now, one of the things this game was often criticized for was for being too difficult. And part of the reason why this game ended up being as difficult as it is because the game wasn't properly playtested. This is definitely a hard game, though I wouldn't say it's as hard as a lot of people make it out to be. I find Rayman 1 to be one of those games where new players might not enjoy it too much, but I feel like when you get the controls down and understand the mechanics well enough, it's actually not that bad to go through. In fact, if you know the levels well enough, you can find some neat shortcuts here and there. Like in the first area in Hard Rocks, normally to get through it, you have to dodge spike balls while you're on moving clouds, and right at the end, you have the option to take a secret route with an extra life at the end. Now, the funny thing is, I actually never take this top side. When you're on the slow moving cloud with a giant spike ball to punch, you can actually drop down here and take the secret route quicker this way. Or in this section, Space Mama's crater, on the left side, there's pins you gotta watch out for. Or you can just jump up to this ledge instead, and not have to bother with that section at all. And there's actually more hidden lives than you think there are. There is a total of 65 hidden lives in this game, and when you collect them, you can't get them back. And many people may not like this idea, but for me personally, I actually prefer this. I don't really like when you can just grind for lives in a single level. I think doing that is just kind of boring. And I think the fact that you can only get these once honestly makes the lives actually fun to go for. Or sometimes you could find lives just for doing something cool. Like if I just drop down here on this tiny platform, a life will spawn. Or if I ignore this bottom path here and just jump over these spikes, a life will also spawn. And here, if I just jump over the spike ball, it also gives you a life. Like, this game rewards you with lives for styling. And I think it's secrets like this that makes me think even when the game can be rough at times, it does throw a bone at you every now and then. And in my opinion, I think this is why I find Rayman 1 such a very rememberable game. Now, the only issues I have with the game that doesn't really involve difficulty is, I think the power to grab and the power for helicopter should have switched places. Not that the beginning of Bandland is necessarily hard, but there are some jumps that are pretty tight without the helicopter. And apart from the grab power being used to get the other cages, it's not really needed until you reach the Blue Mountains. Another one is Mr. Sax is technically an optional boss. Because this level leads to a dead end, and the fact that every cage is in this level, as long as you never take the checkpoint, you could just break every cage, death warp back to the beginning, and take the exit arrow, and you'd never have to fight Mr. Sax. In fact, this is actually used for speedruns to beat the game quicker, and Picture City does not have a lot of good levels. There is only a few of them that are fine, but the level design in most of them feels pretty cluttered and it's very easy to fall into pits. Especially in the first section, where you have to jump on moving pencils on a low ceiling, and you gotta avoid these tacks, which is already not a good introduction to this world. And there was a point where Mr. Dark kidnapped Batil at the ferry, but you never get to see her in Mr. Dark's lair, so it kinda feels a bit unnecessary. They brought it up twice too. Also, the final world should not acquire every Electone. Like, I think 80% would be reasonable, and have one of the images of Batil being captured by Mr. Dark be used as a bad ending. And lastly, shoot, how did that one Eat at Joe's level go again? Yeah, that seems about right. Also, I think it's important to remember that Rayman was mostly designed for the Atari Jaguar. This version of the game behaves differently than the other ports. Like, Rayman's physics are different and there's no ice physics, which probably explains why some of the level design doesn't make too much sense. Pretty much most parts of a game that people complain about is significantly easier on Jaguar. The PS1 version was also a launch title for the system, and the other ports wouldn't get re-released until a few months later. The PC version did fix some of the level design to make it more suitable for Rayman's physics, and it removed some annoying enemy placements here and there, but they just had to make the cages harder to find in this version, and a lot of the visual effects had to be sacrificed. So what about the Sega Saturn version? What's so different about it compared to the PS1 version? Well, not much really. A lot of the sound effects are high-pitched, and there are different visual effects, and the media tracks were removed. However, what a lot of people don't realize about this version is that it also acts as a small bug fix to its PS1 counterpart. One of the examples I can find is, you know that one really annoying ring that's in Blue Mountains? Well, they brought it a bit closer in this version, so reaching it is not as pixel perfect as it is on the PlayStation version. In fact, it's actually close enough to where you don't really need the run power. And I also believe that they fixed the physics for jumping off of the rings, so now it's much easier to get a high jump off of them. I even decided to boot up the game for PS1 and Saturn, being both controlled by one controller, just to be sure if my mind wasn't just playing tricks on me. I tried to Eat at Joe's level to get that one annoying ring to reach. The ring of Cloud is also brought over a bit closer on Saturn, by the way. And from most of my attempts, I was able to easily reach it on the Saturn version. And for PS1, I've only managed to reach it like a few times, and I only managed to get both of them up here twice. There are other changes as well, but it's so small that you wouldn't notice it unless you played both of them. Okay, I know it doesn't sound like much of a change, nor would it change people's thoughts on the game, but for me, I think it's just enough to make it feel fresh to play again. Plus, the different background choices it used gives it a unique vibe, and I kinda like it. I'm not saying I don't like the PS1 version, but it's not my preferred way to play Rayman 1. It kinda sits in the middle of my favorite and least favorite version of the game. I feel like the special effects and the media tracks exclusive to this version isn't really worth it, and I think it shouldn't matter that much because the game still looks fine, and I think the tracks they're replaced with does the job well enough. That's why I prefer the Saturn version. It fixes some of the small stuff, but it still keeps the difficulty that the game is known for, and I'd rather take that than have the game be completely nerfed like how Pac-Man World 2 was handled in Japan. If you want to play this version of the game, I recommend playing it on RetroArch with the Beatles Saturn core. This game is known for struggling to work on Sega Saturn emulators, but I can confirm that the Beatles Saturn can run the game perfectly fine. To wrap things up, Rayman 1 is a flawed game, but I do think it is a good game at heart, and I think people should give it a second shot on this version. And lastly, I want to say happy anniversary to Rayman. Yeah!